Good morning. Unity co-founder Charles Fillmore told us in his book, Keep a True Lent, and I quote, "Our most important study is our own mind. Know thyself was inscribed on the temple of Apollo at Delphi, and it must be inscribed on our own temple over the door of our mind." Yes, know thyself. The reason for doing so, as we all know at Unity, is that the power of the mind is crucial because we create our world with our mind, so we'd better understand how it works. A New Thought affirmation goes, "I start today to be the person I want to be." But as we all know, it's sometimes difficult to keep our aim. And this one in particular is hard to keep because often our unresolved inner issues impede our being the person we want to be. For example, we decide to love and be compassionate toward all beings. Jesus and all genuine spiritual teachers have said that. We all know that. But we soon find someone or some group toward whom we feel negativity. Our egos even justify it. Our little inner lawyer makes a case for its being okay to withhold compassion toward this particular person or group. Thus, we don't get very far being the person we want to be, loving, forgiving, and compassionate. We don't have to be best friends with everyone, of course, but the reason we can't feel compassion toward them is due to our inner issues. If we resolve these issues, we'll have peace, and that's the whole point. This has nothing to do with changing the world for the better. This is a whole other story. But in our hearts, it is smarter to understand and have compassion for all people. Until we do, we go on building up an atmosphere of negativity around us, making our bodies sick and not being able to be at peace. To live a better life, we have to get rid of the psychological cobwebs that prevent our doing and being what we want. Unity teaches that self-knowledge is actually the prelude to Christ consciousness because with correct self-knowledge, we can go forward full throttle on our spiritual path. Without self-knowledge, we often get bogged down in negativity and judgments toward ourselves and others, not having any idea why, and that impedes our growth. Fillmore said in his seminal book, Talks on Truth, "Know thyself. Know who and what you are, where you came from, and what you're doing here, and where you're going." Now, there are actually two parts to the selves that we must know. The first is what many call our soul self, our true and absolute self, which is part of the divine, part of the all. This self is pure goodness and love. But we have a more conventional self that has been programmed and conditioned by our environment. It's ego-oriented, narcissistic, and self-serving. Our real self is divine. Our conventional self can get lost and lose touch with what it really is, and thus not be fully integrated with our true self. It's our conventional plain self that we're going to deal with today. If we can know it, we can work better with it and thus eventually merge our true self with our conventional one in a healthy, functioning way that provides the heaven on earth experience that you all deserve. To know thyself on the relative plane is basically what we today call psychology. If we understand our minds, we can effectively use them so they don't use us. We must look within, as Charles Fillmore said. The Unity texts explain that by looking both without and within, we are taking into consideration the relative plane of physical existence and the absolute plane. By doing so, we're not a house divided. We're a house doubly strengthened. We learn to live in the world, but not of it. We are then able to maneuver in the conventional world on a much higher and more effective level. Charles Fillmore tells us that to live in the relative plane only, thinking that the outer material world is all there is living as if a man lived down in the basement of a large house and refused to go upstairs, saying that because the upper rooms don't come down to him, they just don't exist. He says that to realize that those rooms are there and to find your way up to them, you must study your own mind and realize that you are more than your mind. He tells us what many spiritual masters have, that we have many selves, that there are many aspects to what we call personality. The problem is that these different selves aren't unified. The result is that we are often fragmented and chaotic. Fillmore calls these many selves thought people, and this, by the way, is the key to understanding Unity's metaphysical Bible interpretations. In this system of Bible symbols, people in the Bible represent thoughts and feelings within our individual consciousness. For example, male people represent thoughts, female people represent feelings. Wicked people in the Bible stand for negative thoughts and feelings, and righteous people stand for true and positive thoughts and thinkings. Noah, for example, was righteous and was thus able to rise above the floods of life in his ark. Our ark is our spiritual understanding, which helps us rise above life's turmoils. Marriage in the Bible symbolizes the harmonious unifying of thought and feeling. All these characters are parts of our psyches and thus help us relate to parts of us that might be hidden from us, but essential to living peaceful lives. Fillmore said in his book, The 12 Powers of Man, we must learn to watch our consciousness, its impulses and desires, as the chemist watches his solutions. This is pure Buddhism, by the way. Jesus said, watch and pray. Watch what? Watch how we're thinking. Watch our attitudes. Observe our inner states of mind. In order for us to know how to change our consciousness, we must know what's going on in there. Fillmore tells us in his atom-smashing power of the mind, all things are in our consciousness, and you have to learn to separate the erroneous from the true, darkness from light, the sheep from the goats. In terms of psychology, Unity tells us that when we were children, we learned how to survive. In modern parlance, this is called developing a healthy ego, which is certainly necessary. Unity says that next we learned how to be good. But the next step must be the development of our consciousness, our personal evolution. And this requires understanding what we are working with, the mind. One way to start gaining an objective understanding of ourselves is through meditation. Charles and Myrtle Fillmore went into the silence for an hour every evening. This kind of stillness and meditation is a key to knowing ourselves, both our God essence and our conventional plane psychology. Another way to start understanding ourselves is to be very present all the time. Observe your actions, your speech, your thoughts. So what are some of the things that we might discover when we do this, when we study ourselves? We often discover things we don't like. At that point, we might rationalize this behavior. We might just buffer it out by not letting ourselves notice it anymore. Some people deaden themselves with drugs, alcohol, things like staying very busy so they don't have to deal with what they see, at least consciously. We might stay so busy or tuned out that we forget to notice anything. There are lots of ways people avoid what modern psychology often calls our shadow self, the part of us we don't want to see or own up to. But if we accept it and discover how the shadow self works, we can heal the wounds that caused it in the first place and get free of it. If we don't, it often just gets stuffed down into our subconscious somewhere, and it starts running our lives in sneaky little ways, like we punish or sabotage ourselves because we feel guilty. The mind is tricky. It knows how to rationalize or avoid certain behaviors. But the subconscious always knows what's really going on and can wreak havoc when we try to hide from ourselves. The irony is that our true essence is perfect. It's our little ego false personalities that sometimes act up, and they aren't us. So, the first step to knowing ourselves is to go within and start observing ourselves. Our words, actions, and thoughts are clues to our false personality that's blocking our true essence. We don't have an owner's manual to ourselves, and we're pretty complicated machines. So, observation is the best way we've got to figure it out. In the Old Testament, Moses is seen withdrawing to the wilderness. This represents the discipline that we must all undergo when we seek understanding. This withdrawing, this solitude. Moses went into the solitude of the within before he led his flock out of the wilderness. Metaphysically, this means that we must go within if we are to lead our flock out of the wilderness. Our flock represents our thoughts that we must lead out of the wilderness of our confused mind. Moses' flock thoughts spent 40 years in the wilderness. Numbers are often used as important symbols in the Bible, and the number 40 represents completion. Going within can lead to a completion of our spiritual journey, a new and different state of consciousness. Leading our flock of thoughts out of the wilderness often means that we clear up some of our psychological blocks that our shadow selves cause. We can thus enable our true self, our Christ consciousness, to emerge. Those of you familiar with Hindu psychology or yoga might relate to this idea in terms of the 7 chakras that need to be unblocked in order to reach Krishna consciousness. For example, one of those chakras is the heart chakra, which causes a lot of blockage. Learning why we can't love everyone unconditionally is certainly a way to unblocking the heart chakra. Studying why we can't feel love for our human beings is the same in Hindu or Western psychology. Unity minister and national speaker Robert Brummett says that we are born in pure essence with none of these blocks, but that we develop them, our false self or shadow self, due to not getting our needs met when we are young. This might include traumas of various sorts. At that point, to get these needs met, we start transferring our idea of who we are from essence to personality. And this personality then develops a mental strategy to protect us from further trauma and from feeling like our primary needs aren't being met. Then we start acting, manipulating, and finding ways that aren't direct to meet our needs. We lie about stealing the last cookie in the cookie jar kind of thing. Little brother must have done it. Reverend Brummett says that another factor at work in developing our false self when we're young is the lack of external mirroring, namely our parents who haven't developed their essence and thus aren't able to love us unconditionally. So then we start developing mental strategies to get our emotional needs met. We get identified with this personality, and we find that we lose contact with our essence, and we're no longer, at that point, really integrated beings. This is what the great poet Wordsworth meant when he said, "The child is the father of the man." We are born in essence, at one with the unified all, wise, innocent. Then we start amassing defense mechanisms, ego strategies to meet our needs. We're no longer in touch with our essence. We don't believe we can get the love and attention we need by being real, so we develop a persona and other strategies. Maybe we act out for attention or we manipulate in other ways. Well, tantrums worked when we were young, right? Knowing ourselves means understanding the real reason why we do things and what our motivations are so that we can dispense with the games and be authentic, be our essence selves, and thus be at peace. Bottom line, there's nothing wrong with us, our true self. Clue number 1, if we're judging, feeling negative about a person or thing, anything, any person, we aren't at peace. It's a clue that something needs healing in us. It also means that we are totally at the mercy of outside circumstances for our happiness. Pretty scary, huh? Think about it. Everything and every person has to conform to our conditioning, or we can't be happy and at peace. Suppose some person in your life is causing you grief. It could be your brother, neighbor, coworker, a politician, or an umpire. He or she may be dishonest, manipulative, or narcissistic. It could be a particular religion or group of people. Look a little deeper. Why is this person or group upsetting you so much? What are they triggering in you? What old wound? Why do they open the door to your shadow self, your unforgiving, negative, judgmental self? Why do you suffer so much because of them? Wouldn't you love to get rid of the anguish they cause? If we know ourselves and if we're honest with ourselves, we may find that we need these people or groups to project our negativity on. We can then pretend it's them and not us. Well, you can get relief from this negativity, and you don't have to get a contract out on them to do it. Now, about this time, our egos will jump in and say, well, I can't allow this or that to go on in my life. It's injustice. I'm talking about, well, changing a situation out there is a whole other category. Of course we want to improve the world. Choosing more enlightened friends, getting involved in community service or politics is great. Changing injustices is great. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about how we let other people or situations ruin our peace of mind and thus our evolution. Just look a little deeper now. Know thyself. Maybe the person who disturbs you reminds you of a part of yourself that you don't like or are suppressing, in which case your work is to quit disliking any part of yourself. Maybe this person, religion, political party, or group represents someone who hurt you when you were young and helpless. Once you realize that, you can start seeing that you are no longer defenseless, and you don't need to stress out every time a symbol of this person or group enters your life. You'll never get rid of these kinds of people or groups, but you can completely cure the wound in you that they affect, to the point where you will never be at their mercy again. The bottom line is that when we clear away the false personality, the programmed ego self, there is nothing not to love about us. We are not our personality coping mechanism that we developed as children. Maybe when we were young, our parents didn't know how to love us unconditionally. Maybe we had to conform to their wishes and pretend to be a certain way to get their love. But now we need to be authentic and love ourselves unconditionally. It's never too late to raise yourself. There's nothing wrong with noticing a few things that you might want to change about yourself. This is commendable, but it should not make you feel guilty or unlovable. You're just emptying out a piece of trash when you see it, like you periodically empty the trash on your computer. It works better afterwards. Reverend Brummett says that the way to raise yourself is to spend time every day, maybe 10 minutes even, telling yourself how very lovable and wonderful you are. So, observe yourself. Let yourself see your negativity toward other things and people. Notice your coping mechanism, little white lies, whatever, which probably started with not getting your needs met when you were much, much younger. Remind yourself that the real you, your essence, is perfect. Thus, you start unifying your shadow self and your essence, and life gets a lot easier. It is also the path to being the genuine, well-adjusted, unified being who will be able to stay in essence more and thus bring forth your Christ consciousness. You can get free from the programming, your false personality, all that stuff that makes you judgmental, negative people. You can let them go and live in perfect peace. Everyone deserves that. We deserve to live without the burden of false personalities wreaking havoc in our lives. We deserve to be able to live in our essence so we can be integrated, happy, and peaceful people. This subject of know thyself is so deep that it would take months just to touch the surface. But for today, I'd like to open the door to your thinking about it so that you can then appreciate your essence and start releasing all that isn't really you. And what you are is a divine being. Because of this treasure that you are, you owe it to yourself to periodically check for personality, ego, trash that can accumulate and empty it so that your life will work better. It's all about birthing a greater reality, the real you, your Christ self, and you certainly deserve it. Amen.